Chapter 11. Bellatrix. Part 2 of 2. On the road to the nearest town, Trixie had the fortune of meeting a zebra selling her wagon. Trixie kept some bits in her hat for such emergencies. On the downside, she had to pull the wagon herself. She reached Hoofington where she put on her first show, using the tricks she had been developing over the years. She was a success and earned plenty of bits. The first thing she bought was a purple cape. She used her magic to make the pattern match that of her hat. As time went on, Trixie traveled from town to town, showing off her magic. Sometimes she had to make up stories of her accomplishments to grab ponies' attention. When there wasn't much of an audience, Trixie would hang out with a few groupies. Their adoration was like chili peppers. If she had kept it up, she would have gained enough power to impress her mother, had it not been for her run-in with Twilight Sparkle. As if humiliating her wasn't enough, Trixie found more reasons to get her revenge on Celestia's prized pupil. Months later, she heard there had been a changeling attack on Canterlot, which enraged Trixie. Her mother had already started her takeover plans without her. True, she failed, but the idea was still insulting. The straw that broke the camel's back was a news story on Twilight Sparkle's latest victory over Queen Chrysalis. According to the article, Chrysalis had attempted to turn Twilight as dark as her in order to make the unicorn her pupil. Trixie had not only crushed the paper but zapped it to a crisp. Even my own mother thinks Twilight is better than me. Well, I'll show her. This was the reason Bellatrix never took a new form to start over. The next time she met Twilight Sparkle, she wanted her to be aware of who she was dealing with. Of course, she couldn't improve her magic overnight. She heard rumors of a powerful necklace called the Alicorn Amulet and spent months searching for it, until she found it in an old antique shop. Unfortunately, that plan didn't quite work. Yet again, Twilight had outsmarted her. Not long after her defeat, Trixie took time to reflect on her actions. That amulet had made her do things she had never dreamed of doing. She had spent years draining others of their love, but never really hurt any pony. She hadn't liked it. She hadn't liked it one bit. She was a performer, not a dictator. She wasn't her mother. That was why she felt compelled to apologize to Twilight Sparkle. Bellatrix hadn't quite forgiven her yet, which was why she did it as Trixie. She set out to start anew, to figure things out. That's when she stumbled into Diamondia where the Diamond Dogs, thinking she had the power to summon gems, made her queen. It was glorious at first and she couldn't wait to inform her mother about her sudden rise to power, until Trixie realized how difficult it was being queen. The Diamond Dogs wouldn't let her leave and kept expecting her to produce more gems, which she could not do. She was lucky that Rainbow Dash had agreed to get her out of that jam. Something about having some pony at her side made Trixie feel wonderful, and she started pondering on that friendship thing Twilight was always talking about. So once she was free from Diamondia, Trixie decided to focus on her magic and helping others, hoping to find the path rewarding. 5 years went by quicker than Trixie had anticipated. When she crossed out the big red circle on her calendar, she felt disappointed. 5 years ago, she would have been thrilled that her exile was finally over. But now, her heart wasn't in it. In her exile, she'd become a huge success as a magician and was now a household name. She'd also been helping with the police, the homeless, and orphans. Some of those deeds had been for publicity, but she later found the activities rather enjoyable. There was something fulfilling about bringing joy into ponies' lives. The idea of sucking them all dry made her feel sick. And yet that's what her mother wanted her to do. Once she was queen, Bellatrix was expected to take over Equestria, if her mother never succeeded in doing so herself. Bellatrix didn't want to do that. Sure, ponies were her main source of food, but she never took more love than she needed. Besides, after the incident in Diamondia, it was clear Bellatrix wasn't cut out to be a ruler. So she knew what she needed to do. *. Chrysalis smiled when she saw her daughter buzz into the hive. "Ah, my sweet Bellatrix!" she exclaimed, putting her hoof around her. "You've returned, at last. My, how you've grown!" Bellatrix frowned as she wriggled out of the queen's grasp. "Mother, we need to talk." "Of course, my dear. Now that you're back, it's time we take your training to the next." "There's no more need for training, Mother." Chrysalis blinked but then smirked. "I see. You think you're fully prepared for the throne. Well, my dear, we still need to test your—" "What Bellatrix means, Mother, is that Bellatrix will not be training here anymore." The queen arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The princess placed her hooves firmly on the floor and stood up straight. "Bellatrix wishes to abdicate her position as princess of the changelings." Chrysalis jumped back. "You're not serious, are you?" "No, Mother. Bellatrix is quite serious." "Why are you referring to yourself in the third person? What has the outside world done to you?" "Helped Bellatrix see clearly, Mother." Before, Bellatrix thought all that mattered in the world was power, but now she sees that there are more important things. Like friendship, love, thinking of others rather than yourself. Who taught you such vulgar language? What happened to my daughter? The changeling who would have done anything to get what she wanted. That Bellatrix doesn't exist anymore. She has changed. Bellatrix is very sorry, Mother, but she can no longer live in this hive after all she has seen." Chrysalis clenched her jaw and looked about ready to explode. Then she took a deep breath and looked calmly down at her daughter. "Very well, my dear. Do what you like. Doesn't matter to me. In fact, I already have a replacement. I've just given birth to a prince." Bellatrix nodded. "You would do that, wouldn't you? As soon as you find a more powerful candidate, you cast your own daughter aside. Bellatrix knows about your offer with Twilight Sparkle, Mother. She knows you wanted her to replace Bellatrix. She turned her back to her. And you wonder why Bellatrix prefers the world out there to here." And with that, she departed the hive without looking back. Asterisk. Many years passed, and Trixie found that the size of her audience was declining. She knew this happened to all performers eventually, but didn't know what she'd do if she couldn't perform. She couldn't go back to the hive. That life wasn't for her and she wasn't wanted anyway. What she needed was new material, or to at least shake things up a bit. While she was walking through Trottingham, pondering on this, she passed by a theatre with a large crowd in front. She caught sight of a poster with a blue minotaur on it that read, "The Incredible Iron Will." She had heard of this minotaur and that he'd been giving motivational speeches for decades and his popularity had yet to fall. Trixie figured it wouldn't hurt asking him for a few pointers and followed the crowd in. She pushed for the front row, glaring her horn at any pony who tried to push her back. When the lights dimmed and music sounded throughout the auditorium, the adrenaline inside her started pumping. She had forgotten the excitement of sitting in the audience. Fog covered the stage and a spotlight came up. When she saw the brawny figure rise through the smoke, her eyes widened. When the lights came up and laser beams highlighted the Minotaur's ripped body, Trixie's heart pounded wildly against her chest. "Greetings, friends," he announced. "My name is Iron Will. And today is the first day of your new life. I want you to stomp if—" Trixie stomped hard before he could finish his sentence. The Minotaur glanced down at her briefly and then continued. She didn't even process half of what he was saying. She was too engrossed in his stage presence. His deep voice, his flair, his muscles, the way he spoke in the third person like she always did, she was hooked with no chance of ever getting back in the ocean. After the show, she just had to go meet him backstage. However, she was stopped by 2 security goats before she could knock on his dressing room door. Excuse me," she said. "Trixie doesn't have an appointment, but she just has to speak with Mr. Will." She tried to step around them, but they blocked her path again and brayed. "Oh, Trixie's not thinking anything naughty," she insisted, though this was slightly less true. "She just wants to speak with him, show pony to show, Minotaur." The goats brayed again and shook their heads. Trixie scowled and started up her horn. "Get out of the way, now!" A small dark cloud grew above them and zapped them both with lightning. They shrieked and scattered. "Thank you," Trixie said, smiling in satisfaction. She raised her hoof to knock, but the door opened for her. She looked up at the Minotaur, who was nodding at her in approval. Ironwool saw the whole thing through the keyhole. It was all part of the test. No pony gets to see Ironwool without proving themselves. "Come on in, miss Trixie," she said as she stepped inside. The great and powerful Trixie, to be exact. He said, noticing her cape. "Magician. Cute and smart," she giggled. Trixie must say, "Mr. Will, that was quite a performance." He raised an eyebrow. "Why you referring to yourself in the third person?" She snorted. "You're the one to talk." That got a chuckle out of him. "So what brings you to Ironwool's assertiveness training seminar? Were you 100% satisfied?" Her eyes wandered to his broad chest. "Oh, Trixie's satisfied, all right, though she didn't come here for any assertiveness training. She's quite capable of speaking for herself." "Clearly," Ironwool said, looking out at the goats shivering by the door. Trixie actually came to get a few pointers from a fellow performer. "See, her audience has been lacking lately." "Really?" he said, rubbing his chin in interest. "Well, perhaps the great and powerful Trixie and the incredible Ironwool could discuss this over lunch." Her eyes flashed. "Really? I mean, you sure you're—" She paused to quickly check for his loved ones and frowned when she saw a female Minotaur. "Girlfriend or wife won't mind." The Minotaur's face fell. "Ironwool has been single since the missus passed on." Trixie's heart sank. "Oh, I'm sorry, He held up his hand. "It's okay. Ironwool's had time to get used to it." He smiled slightly. "You still up for lunch?" Trixie nodded ecstatically. Lunch was only the beginning. It was followed by 4 weeks of ecstasy. After they had both done their shows for the day, they would meet for dinner. They exchanged performing techniques, shared their likes and dislikes, and talked about their feelings, something Trixie had never been able to do with anyone. One day, he took her to a carnival where he won her a stuffed pig at a test your strength game. She returned the favor by winning him a gorilla at a dart booth. Before they got off the Ferris wheel, he whispered in her ear, asking that they head back to his place. When she awoke in his bed the next morning, Trixie had never felt so wonderful. She was alone, as he had gotten up to make them breakfast, which gave her time to ponder over last night's events. All these years since she left the hive, she'd been searching for something to fill the emptiness in her heart. She'd done more than given herself to someone she'd grown to care about. She'd found closure with someone. True, he wasn't exactly what she'd expected from a significant other, but changelings were never really picky with species. However, something unpleasant was nagging at her brain. Ironwool had said last night that he was falling in love with her. But he wasn't in love with Bellatrix. He was in love with Trixie. Yes, she was as much Trixie as she was Bellatrix, but there was a whole side of her he didn't know. She felt guilty hiding a big part of her life from him, especially after all he had shared with her. She cautiously opened the kitchen door and found him whistling joyfully as he flipped pancakes on the stove. She couldn't help but smile and imagine what it would be like to wake up every morning to this display. He turned his head and grinned at her. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Trixie replied, taking a seat at the table. "Sleep well?" he asked with a wink. She nodded and said in a sultry voice, "Oh, yes. 100% satisfaction guarantee. He chuckled as he set a plate of pancakes in front of her. Iron will also made some hay smoothies, he said as he poured her a glass from the blender. He remembers how much you like them. They taste like love, she whispered. Hey. Nothing. She levitated the glass to her lips, but then paused and set it back down. What's the matter? Iron will ask. Too sweet. Willie. She said, looking up at him with worried eyes. Last night's not going to be the only time, is it? He grinned as he propped his elbows on the table. Not if you want it to be. I mean, do you think, you and I, that we... His eyes held a glimmer of hope. Do you want to? Oh, I do. I do. It's just... She bit her lip. Well, last night was new to me. His smile disappeared and his face was etched in concern. It wasn't your first time, was it? No, it wasn't my first, but it was different. I feel, close to you, like I can tell you anything. Iron will grinned again as he took her hoof. Iron, I feel the same way. I know, she said under her breath. She knew all too well. She could feel the love radiating from him, and the beating of her heart reciprocated it. Still, she wanted to hear it from his mouth. Do you love me, Willie? He took a moment to ponder and then nodded. Yes. We may have known each other a short time, but I believe I do. Even though we're not exactly the same. Come on, we're very much the same. We're both show creatures, we live to impress others and we have that strange compulsion to speak in the third person. He nodded toward the bedroom. And I think we've already proven that our differences won't get in the way of anything. Trixie smiled slightly at this sentiment but then frowned again. What if I didn't look like this? He blinked. If you mean once you get older. No, I mean. She sighed. If I wasn't beautiful, would you still love me? Trix, I like you for you, not how you look. Then, promise you won't freak out. He raised an eyebrow. Freak out about what? She sighed again as she let go of his hooves. I haven't been entirely honest with you. Not because I don't trust you, but I was scared of how you'd react. He tilted his head in confusion. Trixie, what are you? First of all, my name's not Trixie. It's Bellatrix. And this? She gestured towards her body. Isn't the real me? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Please don't freak out. She immediately regretted it the moment she abandoned her disguise. For as soon as she did, Iron Will shrieked and fell out of his chair. Bellatrix opened her eyes in terror and saw him on the floor, giving her an equally frightened gaze. Why you eh? I know this looks bad, she started to say, but if you let me explain. Changeling! He shouted, crawling backward. Yes, I'm a changeling, she gently said as she held her deformed hoof out to him, but that doesn't mean I don't. Get away from me. Willie, it's me. She insisted, changing back to Trixie. See? You tricked me. You've been feeding on me this whole time. Willie, no, I would never. He grabbed his chair and held it in front of him. Back off. Tears filled her eyes. Willie, please. Don't come any closer. You're not getting a piece of Iron Will. Willie, if you'll just listen to me. Get out. Willie, I love you. Get out. Trixie rushed out the door and picked up her cape and hat. She wept as she ran through the streets. The pain in her heart was too much to bear. She had willingly given herself to him, shown him her full trust. And she had scared him away. Her first instinct was to take her wagon and leave town. She wanted to get as far away from him as possible. And yet, as the weeks went by, she found she couldn't get over it. It became harder for her to perform, for the thought of Iron Wool standing in the audience would always come. She could not even drink hay smoothies or eat pancakes anymore, as they reminded her of that awful day. After a month had passed, her heart still hadn't healed, and the thought of the creature that had broken it made her queasy. She didn't think time was going to heal this wound. Then she remembered something her mother had told her. When the queen's heart was broken by the creature she adored, she had found a remedy. Trixie shivered at the thought. She didn't want to ask her mother for help, and the idea sounded painful, but it couldn't be more painful than what she was going through now. So she returned to the hive for the first time in over a decade. Chrysalis was surprised to see her, but greeted her warmly. "Well, well, well. My dear, dear Bellatrix. So good to see you again, my dear." "Let's cut to the chase, mother," the former princess said bluntly. "You've told me numerous times what you did to mend your broken heart and, well, I want you to do the same to me." Chrysalis's eyebrows shot up. She had not expected this, but the thought made her grin mischievously. "Let me guess. Some male has broken your heart, hasn't he?" She smirked. "Or was it perchance a female?" Bellatrix narrowed her eyes. "Just do it." The queen shrugged. "All right, keep your secrets." "Well, my sweet daughter, I'll comply with your request. However, I must warn you of the possible side effects. See, while this will devoid you of most of your emotions, it will not take all of them. Emotions come from other areas of your body, like the brain." Yes, whatever. Just get on with it." "All right. But there's one thing you must remember." Chrysalis looked seriously, almost sympathetically, at her daughter. "You'll feel liberated at first, but soon you'll find yourself with an emptiness that can never be filled." She said the rest in a low voice. "And once you've had a taste of this emptiness, you can never go back." Bellatrix shook her head as tears developed in her eyes. "I don't care. I just want to stop hurting." Chrysalis sighed. "That's exactly what I said." She raised her hoof to do the deed. Bellatrix closed her eyes and braced herself. She cried out as she felt her mother's hoof plunge into her chest and squeeze around her insides. And then suddenly, she felt nothing. She opened her eyes to see a glowing, green heart pounding in the queen's hoof. "How do you feel?" Bellatrix patted her chest, making sure there wasn't a hole in it. She looked about herself and then up at her mother. "Free," she uttered. I'm not hurting anymore, but, it's a bit strange." The queen smirked. "You'll get used to it, my dear. You'll see how much easier it is to live without emotions getting in the way of things. Perhaps now that you are more like the rest of us, you'll consider rejoining us." Bellatrix's face fell. Suddenly, her brain was working at a pace faster than ever before, and she saw things clearer than ever before. She had been hesitant to rejoin the changelings before, but she was certain of it now. She stood defiantly before the queen. "You don't need me here, mother. You've got my brother to take over for you. And you were right. I'm unfit to be a ruler. I've had my taste of power, and blew it. So I doubt this is a real loss for you. Keep my heart. Lock it away where no one, not even I, will find it. Today is the last day you'll see me, mother. I am done with the hive." She could not read the expression on her mother's face. After a moment of silence, the queen bowed her head. "If that is your desire, I wish you the best of luck, Bellatrix." And so, Bellatrix turned her back on the hive for the final time. Trixie was dedicated to her career more than ever. Now that her destiny was clear, she had nothing else to live for. However, it didn't take long for her to realize the side effects her mother had been talking about. Without her heart, she didn't feel as passionate as she used to about performing. Her head told her it was all she had in life, but her heart was literally not in it. Because of this, the emptiness her mother had warned about slowly grew inside her. After a month of heartlessness, Trixie was beginning to think there was no point in living anymore. Then she felt it. The squirming inside her, like there was a worm trying to wiggle out of her belly. Her mother had explained these symptoms, and that after feeling them multiple times, one got used to it. But Trixie didn't think it would happen without the royal blessing. Part of that spell was meant to kickstart a royal changeling's reproductive organs, so she could have multiple births each month. Her mother also said one would feel queasy during the first few pregnancies, but those would eventually go away. But could she? Without the royal blessing? There was only one way to really be sure. Trixie looked in a mirror and tried the love-seeing spell on herself. Nothing showed up for her, but a picture of herself appeared on her stomach. That's how she knew she had a new life growing inside her. She couldn't reproduce asexually yet, which meant she was carrying the child of the Minotaur who had broken her heart. Asterisk. When the baby arrived, Trixie made sure she was in complete solitude in her wagon. She didn't know how the baby was going to turn out and couldn't risk startling a doctor. It was a pain going into labor alone, but luckily, the little black larva seemed to slip right out. As Trixie held up the larva, she frowned. She felt no joy over seeing her daughter. Even when the little thing opened her slit yellow eyes, she felt nothing. She didn't even cry. It was disappointing. Then she noticed something odd about the larva. It had a small grey horn growing out of its forehead. The yellow eyes also reminded her greatly of the father. Anger welled up inside her, one of the few emotions that seemed to stay. Her heart was gone, yet this child was here to take its place as a reminder of her heartbreak. For a moment, she considered getting rid of it. Then the larva sneezed and was encased in green flames. Trixie yelped as she was now holding a blue unicorn foal with black cloven hooves, a cow-like tail and a curl of highlighted blue hair. The child sneezed again and turned back into a larva. "Goodness!" Trixie exclaimed. "You're certainly going to have a hard time with the world." The baby responded by sneezing back into a foal. Then she started crying. Trixie tried to shush her as she cradled her. It took a few minutes for the filly to fall asleep, a small smile on her face. Trixie couldn't help but smile a bit too. "You're a strange one," she said. "You're going to need someone to help you hide these oddities, so you won't be ostracized like your mother was." Trixie still felt no pleasure in holding her newborn, but she did feel a sense of responsibility. She was all this unusual child had and no one was going to protect her but her mother. As a moonbeam shone on the child's peaceful face, Trixie realized that her life wasn't so empty anymore. She had a new purpose. She vowed that no matter what, she was going to bring happiness to this little filly, even if that happiness could never be reciprocated. Still, she found herself wishing every day for the next 9 years that just for a moment, she could feel love for her daughter. Author's note. See why this took a while? Yes, some of you guessed it was Iron Will. Sorry, it's my crack ship. What made you guys think Moonbeam's father was a griffin or Draken Equus? I can't believe you guys didn't get the Ojkar the Great thing, which is a reference to Oz, the Great and Powerful. Backstories are tough. I didn't bother going into too much detail with stuff in the show and comics, since most of you already know what happened. But man! Sometimes I didn't know when to call her Trixie or Bellatrix. End author's note. End chapter 11. Bellatrix.